episode of Durarara, we finally get the backstory on the cold and ruthless Russian assassin, Verona. Saika also goes insane, and Aoba looks like he's finally making his move. Lots of interesting developments in this week's episode, but my favorite thing was definitely the backstory with Verona, which was pretty disturbing and very depressing all at the same time. Her father, Drakon, pretty much completely ignored her throughout her entire childhood, and she was preoccupied with doing nothing but reading books. This really explains her personality and how she happens to know all of this random and trivial trivia. The thing about Verona, though, is that she's kind of insane. She's kind of psychotic. There's always that one moment that pushes people over the edge, and you actually get to see it in this week's episode. There was this one moment during her childhood where her home was being burgled by this one creepy-looking guy, and she ends up tricking him in this really messed up way where she actually has all of the water in the bathroom overflow in the sinks and the bathtubs, and it actually creates this noise which actually attracts this guy, and she also has this skateboard which she actually puts right in the middle of the floor. As soon as this guy opens the door, she pushes him, he slips on the skateboard, falls into the tub, and then she oh so casually takes a blow dryer, throws it into the water, and completely electrifies the guy. It's really disturbing because, one, she thought of this all on the fly and just from the knowledge that she got from the books, and two, she's completely emotionless through all of this, and yet she almost seems to get a huge high from this as well. This is also the moment where her father actually starts to acknowledge her, and that's another incredibly instrumental part of her character. About halfway through the episode, they actually follow up on that scene from the end of last week's episode where someone's about to break into Henri's apartment. And basically all of this build-up was to see a battle between Saika, Henri, and with Verona. And it's pretty freaking awesome. It's definitely one of the highlights of the episode, especially when Celti gets involved when she's jumping over ramps and pulling out her shadow scythe. I especially loved the foreshadowing at the beginning of this week's episode when they were mentioning that sniper rifle that Verona was going to use. They mentioned that if she ever used it, at least in Ikebukuro, everybody would know because it's loud as shit. And at the end of the episode, there's this really great chase scene where Celti is chasing after them and she actually has to pull out the sniper rifle. And what's really crazy about this moment is that she's actually starting to feel fear here, at least after the whole Henri moment. She's finally starting to realize that the people in Ikebukuro are not going to be the typical assassins that she's gone up against, and she's forced to use this sniper rifle, which actually ends up sending Celti just flying across the streets, but she was able to survive thanks to her shadow shields. So what's the rundown? On this week's episode of Durarara, this was awesome. This is just showing that all the Russians in this show are so freaking awesome. I especially loved that old general guy who actually had his hands that were stuck inside the pot, and he actually had his gun in there, and he used that to trick that one guy who was trying to kill him. I thought that was pretty clever, but my favorite thing was all of the Verona backstory. Whether it was the first time she actually killed the burglar, or just sitting to see her like train with Simon, I thought was really awesome. But still, I love that they actually brought back the whole Saika thing. That was a really nice element, and really that's starting to boil over as this series is going on. And what I really love is how in the previous episode, Verona was commenting about how boring Ikebukuro is, and now things are really starting to look up, and I'm sure she's going to start getting really excited. And she's just plain insane. Like, they really just showed how her assassin career grew over the years. And there's this one scene where she literally took out the enemies of her father, all of them, and had them all hung up completely, and then she just goes back to reading her magazine. She's a very creepy character, to say the least, and we've had a lot of those in the second season of Durarara. Aside from all the Verona stuff, they're basically just sort of trying to plant the seeds for Ryugamin's story in this week's episode, which pretty much just ends on a cliffhanger this week, but I really appreciate it, and I can't wait to see where that's going. But my favorite thing about this week was just all of the great action scenes with Verona and Saika. It was just all handled really well. My only complaint about this week's episode, and this is like a technical thing, a lot of the artwork is just kind of iffy at times. There's a lot of moments where it's just not very detailed. Sometimes you don't even see the faces, and sometimes the animation is frankly kind of choppy at points. Despite that, this was still a really good episode of Durarara, which if you've been following the series or watched the first season, you should definitely check out. It's pretty much just more of the same with some brand new characters who are pretty freaking awesome. So I'm going to give this week's episode a 4 out of 5. Not a perfect episode. There are some artwork and animation flubs, but for the most part, I think this is still a really interesting episode that you should definitely check out if you're a fan of the series. Thank you guys for watching my review. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up. And before you guys leave, please tell me what you thought about this week's episode of Durarara in the comments section below. And remember guys, if you have not subscribed to our channel, you can do that by clicking on our channel icon right up here. You can also follow us on Facebook and on Twitter. And make sure to check out our brand new video podcast series, The Powerful Nerdcast. There will be a link for that in the description box below.